You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hey guys, back with another Fallout 4 video, and today I figured it might be interesting to speculate about the fate of the Courier from Fallout New Vegas, as well as talk about where the Courier might be during the events of Fallout 4. Now, before we get into this video, I think it's important to understand that unlike the Lone Wanderer from Fallout 3, the Courier's fate is a lot more ambiguous due to both the nature of Fallout New Vegas' ending and some outcomes of Fallout 3 are directly mentioned in Fallout 4. After all, characters like Elder Maxon were in Fallout 3 and reappear in Fallout 4, and based on some dialogue from Deacon in Fallout 4, we can imply that Project Purity was activated since it's safe to drink the water in the Capital Wasteland. With this in mind, let's go ahead and discuss the Courier's origins. In a manner that is consistent with most Elder Scrolls and previous Fallout games, little is actually known about who the Courier is. Interestingly, it does appear that he has an iconic vault suit, as well as duster that contains the Vault 21 symbol. Oddly, the Courier doesn't appear to have ever been a vault dweller, and it appears that this symbol only appears in some of the ending slides for both the New Vegas vanilla game and its DLC. However, there are a couple of things that we know about the Courier based on some dialogue provided by Ulysses, who is from the Lonesome Road DLC, and from a blog post written by Chris Avallone on Obsidian.net. As for the former, the Courier has some dialogue with Ulysses that implies that the Courier has been to several different places in the western part of the American wasteland. Specifically, Ulysses says, and I quote, "You've walked the West more than I have. Circle Junction, Reno, Vault City, word of you at Fort Aradesh, Fort Abandon. Even further west than that, Brahmin drives on the Big Circle." From this quote, we can conclude that the Courier has been to these locations. So the Courier has been to Fort Aradesh, Vault City, New Reno, and Circle Junction, and also the Big Circle. There's also some information provided by Chris Avallone's blog on Obsidian.net. According to the blog post, sometime after the NCR attacked Navarro, a former Enclave outpost that appears in Fallout 2, they recover a bunch of technology that they don't understand. The NCR recognized certain things like a pre-war American flag and enlisted the Courier to take an item from Navarro to a place with similar markings in the Divide. The Courier delivers the package to the location of Hopeville and leaves, unaware that the package contained nuclear launch codes. The package ends up detonating some nuclear warheads underground. This causes an earthquake, it irradiates the area, and wipes out the settlement. This area becomes known as the Divide, and is where you visit during the Lonesome Road DLC. We also know that the Courier was hired by the Mojave Express delivery company to deliver Robert House's platinum chip to him in New Vegas. Eventually, the Courier was intercepted by Benny, who captured the Courier and shot him or her in the head twice and left them for dead in a shallow grave. Eventually, a Securitron named Victor comes along, digs the Courier out, and presumably takes them to Doc Mitchell, who is the resident doctor of Goodsprings. Once the Courier leaves Doc Mitchell's care, it's up to the player to decide what happens to them next, and it's where the game begins. How will the Courier decide the second battle for Hoover Dam? And how will the Courier decide to tackle the conflicts presented by all of Fallout New Vegas' DLC? Otherwise, the Courier is really whoever you want them to be during player creation. Plus, certain special stats can greatly determine the player character's attributes. As an example, low or high intelligence will usually affect how the Courier interacts with various NPCs throughout the game. Something that seems to be suggested is that the Courier is someone that doesn't necessarily seem to stay in one particular place for a long amount of time. As Ulysses points out, the Courier has been all over the western part of the American wasteland. At one point or another, the Courier has been to New Reno, Vault City, and a couple of other places called Fort Aradesh, which is named after one of Fallout 1's key NPCs, and Fort Abandon, which is a location mentioned in some of the game, however we've never actually been there in any of the Fallout games. This is important to mention since it's very likely that the Courier could have simply continued to wander the American wasteland, taking various jobs, and could be doing so during the events of Fallout 4. With this said though, there is a possibility that various endings for Fallout New Vegas could shed some light on what happened to the Courier and what he or she may be up to during the events of Fallout 4. For the uninitiated, Fallout New Vegas has a hard ending where the player can no longer continue to play. This is unlike Fallout 3 with broken steel installed, or Fallout 4 in general, where the player can continue to play the game after you've finished the main quest. New Vegas required the player to complete any and all of the DLC before starting the Battle of Hoover Dam, which would essentially end your playthrough. Fallout New Vegas has 4 major endings. You either side with Caesar's Legion, the NCR, Robert House, or you solidify an independent New Vegas without either of the 2 major factions, and Robert House being present. Unlike previous games like Fallout 3, where the good karma ending ended up being the clear ending, you could pick either of these 3 factions and receive good, neutral, or bad karma endings. Just to be clear, you can also receive a good, neutral, or bad karma ending for the independent New Vegas ending as well. Now, granted, some other conditions will determine what version of the major endings you will get, but ultimately, the ending greatly varies, and that's perhaps why Fallout New Vegas was so popular to many people. What we can say is that at the very ending of the game, the Courier and his or her fate is mentioned during the 3rd slide that is presented. Now, for the most part, the endings are all fairly similar, despite what the Courier's karma is at the end of the playthrough. In all cases, if the NCR is chosen, the Courier is awarded with the Golden Branch. If the Legion is chosen, whether or not Caesar dies, a golden coin will be minted in the Courier's honor. If you help Robert House, he will let the Courier presumably live in Lucky 38 Casino, and if you make New Vegas independent, you presumably become the leader of New Vegas. This variation can make predicting a canon ending really difficult simply because any and all of the endings could feasibly be canon. However, of the 4 endings, I would think that the Legion ending is probably the least likely to be canon, followed by both the independent and house-ruled New Vegas endings. I would ultimately go with the NCR ending being canon since 3 of the 4 endings feature the NCR defeating the Legion at the Battle of Hoover Dam. Granted, there are different outcomes to each ending, however that's whether you decide to betray the NCR or not by making yourself the leader of New Vegas or by helping Robert House. It's possible that the other endings may end up being the actual canon endings. However, if I did have to place my bet on who gets control of New Vegas, they aren't going to be able to do it unless they have the help of the NCR. I also think that the NCR and Legion endings tend to play more into the Courier's nature of being a sort of wanderer for hire. Both factions honor the Courier, however, they leave the Courier the opportunity to not be tied down by helping running an independent New Vegas, and they also don't become a lieutenant of Robert House. However, just to reiterate, it's important to mention that the beauty of Fallout New Vegas is that you have several viable choices for an ending, and you aren't really tied down to a specific path or outcome like you were in Fallout 3. And now for the big question. Where is the Courier during the events of Fallout 4? Ultimately, it's pretty difficult to say just exactly what happened to the Courier. However, I would say if the NCR won the Battle of Hoover Dam and got control over New Vegas, it's likely that the Courier simply returned to being a courier and traveled throughout the wasteland performing jobs for various factions. As mentioned previously, the Courier never really liked to stay in the same place for long, so it doesn't seem like governing an independent New Vegas would be of much interest to them. Simultaneously, it's also probably important to discuss what actually happened after the Courier was shot in the head and before the Battle of Hoover Dam occurs. Does the Courier help the Boomers, Brotherhood, Remnants, Great Khans, or Followers of the Apocalypse? Assuming that the Mojave chapter receives help from the Courier, and in turn the Brotherhood of Steel help the NCR fight the Legion at Hoover Dam, I think it's fair to say that Elder Mcnamara may still be in charge of the Mojave chapter. There's a strong possibility that Elder Mcnamara is one of the West Coast elders of the Brotherhood of Steel that supports Elder Maxon's East Coast Brotherhood during the events of Fallout 4. While we can't say for certain how well the Courier treated any of these factions, I would go out on a limb and simply say that the Courier didn't actively undermine any of them and most likely convinced each of them to help the NCR, or in the case of the Great Khans, break their alliance with the Legion. I also think the Legion ending would produce a similar result to the NCR. However, you would certainly see the Brotherhood being wiped out and the Great Khans would lose their identity as they were integrated into the Legion. If Caesar survives, the followers are allowed safe passage out of the Mojave, and if you've enlisted the help of the Enclave remnants and boomers, Caesar will probably leave them alone. It's unclear whether the loss of the Mojave chapter would affect the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 4, since the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood was simply one West Coast chapter. Instead of awarding the Courier a golden branch like the NCR does, the Legion would mint a coin in their honor. Regardless of the player's karma, what we can be certain is that if this ending is chosen, the Mojave is certainly under Legion control, and it's also likely that the Courier is free to travel throughout all Legion territories. Perhaps they become a courier for the Legion. The Mr. House ending results in the Brotherhood's Mojave chapter being destroyed, and the NCR and Legion being driven out of the Mojave. In addition, it's possible that the Great Khans are also wiped out during the Battle of Hoover Dam by the NCR and Mr. House's Securitron forces. Otherwise, there appears to be little confrontation with the followers of the Apocalypse, the Boomers, and even the Enclave remnants. With this said, Arcade Gannon doesn't seem to be particularly enthused about Mr. House and leaves the followers if House gains control of New Vegas. For this ending, it would appear that the Courier becomes a sort of number 2 to Mr. House, as House will allow the Courier to remain in the Lucky 38. It's unclear what the Courier would do at this point, and it's likely that they would simply either be living in New Vegas and tending to Mr. House's needs, or maybe Mr. House allows them more freedom to simply roam around the American wasteland as they please. I would say the most interesting scenario is if the Courier manages to establish an independent New Vegas. This would require the Courier to govern the region. According to Endgame slides, the followers of the Apocalypse leave New Vegas as a result of the rising instability in the region. This is also further reinforced by the corresponding Boomer slide, which says, and I quote, "Though the wasteland became anarchic after Hoover Dam, the Boomers' display of power dissuaded fortune seekers from attempting to penetrate Nellis. The Great Khans will survive as long as you convince them to break their alliance with the Legion, the remnants are still around, and the Brotherhood of Steel should continue to be allied with the Courier regardless of whether the Securitrons are upgraded or not. Though it's important to mention that if you do oust Mcnamara and help Harden, then the Brotherhood will retake Helios 1, provided that you don't upgrade the Securitrons. Ultimately, though, the general consensus seems to be that making the Mojave independent would bring major instability to the region. Though I suspect upgrading the Securitrons or not will have some effect on this outcome. So perhaps upgraded Securitrons under the Courier's control would bring slightly more stability. The most likely scenario is that the Courier is still around during the events of Fallout 4 and they are delivering packages somewhere out west. Then again, if they join the Brotherhood of Steel, are they still a member as a result of the game's conclusion? By becoming a member of the Brotherhood, it may mean that the Courier works as a member of the Brotherhood of Steel and could have contacts with Maxon and the East Coast. Or at the very least, they're under an Elder, and the Elder they're under has contacts with Elder Maxon and the East Coast. If you ask me, I suspect the Courier is wandering somewhere out in the West Coast, waiting for the opportunity to change the fate of some other part of the wasteland. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like and let me know, what do you think happened to the Courier and where do you think he is? Or she is? Otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care and I'll see y'all next time.